Happy full moon in Virgo. Welcome back to the Aquarius podcast, where we talk about astrology with a focus on emotional intelligence. This Virgo lunar eclipse full moon is carrying a quiet, accumulating, and increasingly difficult energy to ignore. There's a pressure here, an emotional pressure under this Virgo lunar eclipse at the Pisces degree because it's asking for honest inventory. It doesn't want us to perform. It doesn't want improvement as theater. It wants truth. There's a sense here of being emotionally overworked, as if too many processes are running at once and the system is lagging. Irritation, mental fatigue, a low tolerance for inefficiencies are common under a full moon in Virgo. What's actually being triggered, though, is a recognition of how long certain emotional habits have been running unattended by us. There's a recurring emotional tone here. It's disappointment. We feel disappointed, but we have nobody to blame. You may even notice frustration towards yourself, especially around choices that you made in the past for the sake of being practical, of being responsible, of being duty bound, for the sake of harmony. And you're noticing now that that harmony is costing you emotional integrity. The Virgo moon sharpens our awareness of what is off in our routines, in our work-life balance, in our relationships, in our health, in our mental and emotional well-being, and in our self-talk. While the Pisces sun dissolves justification that once made those compromises feel meaningful, what we're left with is a sense of being destabilized because the old stories no longer work, they're no longer convincing, and the new ones aren't fully developed yet. In relationships, you may suddenly feel used. You may feel like you're carrying more emotional labor than your partner is acknowledging or recognizing. You may even realize that you've been abandoning your own personal goals for the sake of being invested in partnership. If you've been avoiding personal accountability by staying accommodating in relationship, this full moon in Virgo under this lunar eclipse is going to feel a bit jarring. This eclipse in Virgo is exposing where you've been silently tolerating misalignment. There's also a high risk for projection. As you know, Virgo is very good at gaslighting. So don't be surprised if you find yourself irritated and displacing your personal anger towards yourself onto your partners, onto your coworkers, onto authority figures, basically onto everyone else. When really the deeper issue is that you have not been meeting your own internal needs. And you're now feeling angry at yourself for abandoning yourself. This inner tension centers on control versus surrender. Pisces is about surrender, while Virgo is about control. Part of you wants to work, to fix, organize, correct. Another part is exhausted by the constant self-management, and he wants to just let it go and let the pieces fall wherever they may. This can manifest as vacillating between being hyper-focused, followed by just being completely disinterested and withdrawing, or indulging in self-criticism, followed by just escaping reality. These are extremes. Neither extremes resolve the emotional tension. The growth edge here is around knowing what requires intervention and what requires acceptance. It's not about spiritual bypassing. So let's talk about it. Where are you confusing responsibility with self-erasure? Where has compassion turned into avoidance? Where has competence become an armor that does not let in any sensitivity? Learn to notice your first emotional reactions without immediately feeling like you need to fix it or explain it. Pay attention to your body language, your fatigue, your tightness, your irritability. All of this is data, not obstacles, not problems to be fixed, but data for you to comprehend, to understand yourself better. It's about being willing to teach yourself who you are. So question the rule book that you created within. Question the operating system. Who wrote it? Who wrote these rules? And do they still apply? Do they make you happy? Ultimately, the emotional landscape of this eclipse is about recalibration. Virgo's excellent at fine-tuning processes. You're not being asked to become better. You're being asked to become more accurate. That accuracy, while initially uncomfortable, is what restores emotional clarity. Now, let's move on to the aspects analysis of this full moon in Virgo. First, we have the moon opposite the sun. Emotionally, this is going to amplify polarization. You may feel pulled between competing needs, responsibility versus resting, being useful versus finding meaning in what you're doing, having clarity versus doing things from compassion. Fear can arise around not wanting to get it wrong. Virgo's very obsessed with not wanting to get it wrong and not wanting to disappoint someone. And often they end up disappointing themselves as a result. Longing here shows up as a desire for wholeness or for relief from these internal contradictions. At its best, this opposition is going to reveal a strong capacity for greater self-awareness and integration, but only if neither side is demonized. We cannot fix things while we're in the state of criticizing them, okay? Notice where you're forcing a choice that requires integration and not sacrifice. So ask yourself, what part of me feels unheard right now? And what does it need to feel included rather than overridden? We're not punishing, we're integrating. All right, moving on to Moon being in opposition to Mercury. This aspect is going to heighten emotional friction, okay? Thoughts feel intrusive. There's going to be a lot of self-criticism, overly analytical, especially under stress. Fear often centers on being misunderstood or making the wrong choice. Insecurities here can manifest as ruminating, meaning thinking about the same thing over and over and over and over again. Or another Virgo trait, which is verbal defensiveness, basically wanting to immediately move into vocalizing feedback whenever we're receiving information that does not make us feel good. Yet, this aspect also reveals a strong talent for emotional articulation. So once the nervous system calms down, there's real capacity here for insight and for translating feelings into language that other people can understand. The reactive pattern around overthinking or being emotionally reactive instead of feeling our feelings is a part of us that we have to examine. We want to allow our emotions to exist without immediately explaining them or immediately fighting them or immediately fixing them. Ask yourself, am I trying to think my way out of a feeling that needs to be acknowledged first? It's okay to create room for the feeling. Not every feeling needs to be fixed. Moving on to Moon sextile Jupiter, this placement emphasizes emotional experiences. It can awaken feelings like hope. It can awaken a quiet sense of growth. Even when we feel uncomfortable, it provides a little bit of a pressure release system, if you want to think about it that way. So the longing here that we experience is going to be constructive. There's a desire for meaning, for wisdom, for ethical alignment. This aspect is going to highlight resilience and an underlying emotional generosity. Bypassing discomfort by jumping too quickly to everything happens for a reason is not really sitting with the feelings, It's important to use our perspective to support emotional honesty, not replace it. It's not about making things better, finding meaning in everything. Sometimes it's about just being uncomfortable and seeing what that discomfort can teach you if you're willing to invite it. Next, Moon square the ascendant. This is acutely relational, meaning that this is going to be relationship triggers, okay? Emotional triggers come up through interactions and relationships where we feel like others are not understanding us, they're not seeing us clearly, they're taking us for granted. This is about feeling too much pressure under our roles of being the girlfriend, the wife, the fiance, the employee, the daughter, the mother, the father. It's about relationships and the roles that we assign to them. Insecurity may show up as people pleasing or being irritable when our needs aren't being intuitively met. The problem with the Virgo and Pisces axis is that these two often struggle with emotional vulnerability, so they expect others to just intuitively know what they need. And when others don't respond exactly how they imagined, they tend to get very deeply offended, but they don't know how to communicate A, their expectations, and B, the emotional aspect of the offense that they took from whatever others did to them. The strength here is about being emotionally responsive and relationally aware. And that requires boundaries. Relationships cannot function without boundaries. And what I mean by that is a healthy boundary in relationship is to understand that nobody can read your mind and no one fully understands what's going on with you. If you need something, you ask for it. If you don't get it, you ask for it again. Adjusting yourself to preserve relationships and preserve connections without communicating your needs and then resenting others for not meeting your needs is a toxic cycle that no one can get out of. Recognizing that authenticity is not a threat to belonging. Belonging requires vulnerability. It requires authenticity. It requires honesty. Ask yourself, where am I performing emotional competence instead of expressing emotional truth? The truth can be quite simple. Moving on to Moon conjunct IC and being in opposition to MC. This aspect pulls emotions inward. Nostalgia, old family patterns may come up. Vulnerability may surface unexpectedly too. Fear, being seen in a moment of emotional need or not having it all together. Yet, this placement is revealing deep emotional roots and an instinct for self-reflection. Private truth is asking to be honored over public image. Retreating emotionally whenever your needs are not being met or over-identifying with the way you were raised are not going to get you to a happy place. You have to be able to separate yourself from who you were trained to be and choose who you want to become and invest energy into who you're becoming. That requires noticing emotional patterns that were inherited rather than chosen, and then making choices. You have to deliberately ask yourself, do I still need to operate this way in the world? Next, the moon is in opposition to the North Node. Emotionally, this can feel like fatigue with repetition. There may be some sadness or some grief, some quiet grief around realizing that a familiar emotional strategy that we've employed is no longer working. There's longing here for forward movement, but fear resists letting go of what's known. The strength is awareness. You can now see the pattern clearly. Clinging to emotional habits because it feels safer than uncertainty is not a good strategy for emotional well-being. Trusting that discomfort can be transitional is what's needed. It's the idea of embracing discomfort, knowing that it's not permanent. So the emotional loop that you're going through right now, are you ready to step out of it? Even if the next step isn't fully clear, that's what you have to decide. The moon is also square part of fortune. This usually triggers dissatisfaction. Doing the right thing, but not really feeling fulfilled. There's some insecurity here around whether happiness is being earned correctly. Desires emerge from a more authentic sense of well-being, one that isn't based on performance. Chasing emotional payoffs through productivity or approval, we're noticing is no longer working for us. It's no longer an effective strategy. So what we're being called to do is to redefine success in emotional terms rather than external terms. So what actually nourishes you? What actually nourishes your soul? What actually makes you feel prioritized and what doesn't? The moon is contraparallel the sun. This intensifies emotional awareness. At a bodily level, feelings may register in your body as fatigue, as tension. There may be some somatic responses or even somatic sensitivities. You may notice pain in your body more clearly under this lunar eclipse. Fear is often preverbal. Usually there is physical discomfort first, followed by emotional discomfort, which then follows the conscious awareness of the discomfort. Everything starts in the body. The discomfort that you feel in your body is telling you a story. The strength here is to be willing to become more intelligent. Emotions want to be felt. They don't want to be managed. They want to be acknowledged and felt. Overriding your physical or emotional limits is not a good strategy for long-term emotional fulfillment. We want to treat our body as an altar, as an ally. It's not an obstacle. We need it to survive. So when he tells us something is going on, we trust it. When your body is signaling something to your mind, you don't rationalize it, you receive it. Taken as a whole, these moon aspects are describing an emotional landscape that is not asking for emotional mastery, but rather emotional precision, emotional accuracy, emotional honesty. The work is in noticing when reactions are automatic, when reactions are inherited or driven by fear, and choosing responses that are aligned with what's true, what's real, what's present, rather than past survival strategies. The tension itself is forcing emotional self-reflection. This lunar eclipse in Virgo is basically saying, this is where you need to grow emotionally. It's up to us to listen. Now, let's move on to some psychologically precise eclipse affirmations and confessions for each of the rising signs. Some of these might be a little hard to hear because there are naming what Virgo usually edits. And each affirmation is not magical thinking. It's a conscious emotional posture that I want you to practice under this lunar eclipse. For Aries rising, this is going to fall into the 6th house, which is the house usually occupied by Virgo. This is a house of work, health, and daily routine. The confession is I equate my worth with how busy I am. And I am afraid that if I stop managing everything is going to fall apart. And I'll be seen as expendable. The affirmation is I can care for systems without turning myself into a machine. Rest and efficiency are not enemies. Okay? So take a look at your daily routines, your health habits, your work patterns, because they're asking you to refine them. And you want to do this without self-punishment. None of this is about critique and punishment. All of this is about awareness, okay? Moving on to Taurus rising. For you, this falls in the 5th house. This is the house of creativity, pleasure, and vulnerability. The confession is I hide my need for joy behind being practical because wanting more feels irresponsible or perhaps even risky. The affirmation, my creativity and pleasure are legitimate needs, not indulgences I have to earn. For you, you're being called to look at your relationship with your children if you have them. Look at your self-expression, your romance, your relationship with joy and play, and ask yourself, what have I been postponing in favor of control? Moving on to Gemini rising. For you, this falls in the 4th house, which is the house of the home or emotional roots and our inner safety. The confession, I intellectualize my emotions because sitting with them feels destabilizing, especially when they trace back to toxic family patterns. The affirmation, I can create inner safety by feeling rather than explaining everything. You're being asked to look at your family dynamics, your emotional foundation, and your home life. Those parts of your life are ready for honest reassessments. Cancer rising, for you, this falls in the 3rd house, which is the house of communication, thought patterns, and sibling relationships. The confession, I manage other people's emotions through my words while quietly neglecting my own emotional truth. The affirmation, clear, honest communication begins with naming what I actually feel, not what sounds acceptable. The areas for you to focus on are the way you do conversations, your mental habits, your daily interactions. Those areas of your life are going to reveal emotional habits that need updating. Leo rising, for you, this falls in the 2nd house, which is the house of self-worth, the house of resources, the house of values, the house of money. The confession is, I chase security to quiet the fear that I'm not enough without proof. The affirmation, my value is intrinsic. Money and validation are tools. They're not measurements of my worth. You're being asked to look at your finances. your self-esteem, and your priorities, because those areas of your life are going to show you where fear has been substituted for trusting yourself. Moving on to Virgo rising, for you, this falls in the first house, the house of identity, the house of body image, self-concept, ego. The confession is, I believe I must constantly improve myself to be acceptable, and I'm exhausted by that pressure. The affirmation, I'm allowed to be seen as I am, not only as I am becoming. You're being asked to look at your self-image, your physical appearance, your physical presence, your identity. All those areas are going through a recalibration right now, and you're being called towards self-compassion. So less self-criticism and more self-acceptance. Libra rising, for you, this falls in the 12th house, which is the house of unconscious patterns, the house of karma, retreat, and emotional closure. The confession is, I avoid conflict so deeply that I sometimes disappear from my own emotional life. The affirmation, facing my inner world gives me more peace than avoiding discomfort ever did. The areas of life for you to focus on are your hidden fears, your emotional trauma, your unconscious coping mechanisms. All those areas are going to resurface because they want you to release them, to let them go, okay? Moving on to Scorpio rising, for you, this falls in the 11th house, the house of friendship, belonging, and future vision. The confession is, I fear rejection, so I keep parts of myself guarded, even in groups where I want to belong. The affirmation is, authentic connection requires risk, not self-erasure. The areas for you to focus on are your alliances, your friendships, your social circles, and your long-term hopes. Those areas will reveal where emotional armor has been limiting the depths of your emotional connections. Moving on to Sagittarius rising, for you, this generally falls in the 10th house, which is the house of our public image, our authority, as well as our career. The confession is, I measure success by external achievement, even when it costs emotional fulfillment. The affirmation, true success includes emotional integrity, not just visibility or status. The areas for you to focus on are your career direction, leadership roles, and your public identity, as those areas are being emotionally audited. Capricorn rising, for you, this falls in the 9th house, the house of our spirituality, belief system, meaning, and worldview, as well as philosophy. The confession is, I rely on certainty and structure because uncertainty makes me feel exposed. The affirmation is, I can revise my beliefs without losing my grounding or purpose. It's time for you to look at your religion, spiritual belief system, philosophy, education, because those areas will show you where emotional rigidity is blocking your ability to grow, to move past where you currently are in your state of consciousness. Aquarius rising, for you, this falls in the 8th house. This is the house of control, intimacy, as well as shared resources. The confession is, I crave depth, but fear intimacy. So I manage closeness instead of surrendering to it. The affirmation, intimacy does not weaken me. Avoidance does. It's time for you to look at your emotional bonds, your power dynamics. Those areas are being activated for honest engagement. And lastly, moving on to Pisces rising, this falls for you in the 7th house, which is the house of marriage, relationships, projections, and commitment. The confession is, I look for myself in others and lose clarity about where I end and they begin. The affirmation, healthy relationships begin with clear boundaries and self-definition. It's important for you to take a look at your partnerships, your one-on-one dynamics. Those areas are going to expose patterns of projection and over-accommodation for the sake of keeping relationships. Across all rising signs, this eclipse is asking for emotional precision over emotional performance. These confessions are not flaws, they're data points. And the affirmations are not affirming illusions, they're conscious emotional choices that practiced consistently can change the pattern rather than repeating it. Now let's move on to some emotional regulation that directly manages some of the reactive emotions that is often associated with Virgo energy and diffuse the feeling of overwhelm by strengthening conscious awareness. So for Virgo, one intervention that I would recommend for emotional regulation is a body mindset cycle. Step one, you want to do a body scan. What that looks like is closing your eyes, quickly scanning from head to toe for tension. If you notice tension, just name it quietly. Clenched jaw, tight shoulder, burning forehead. And then you want to inhale for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 6 counts. And imagine the tension leaving your body with each breath in and out. Identify the core feeling without judgment. I feel anxious because I'm worried that I'm not doing a good enough job. Emotional labeling is very important to help us manage our feelings. After you've labeled the emotion, you want to make a micro choice to reset yourself. So choose one small, realistic action that honors yourself and reduces the pressure. Maybe it's, let me go outside and get some fresh air. Let me go drink a glass of water. Let me stretch. Let me listen to a song that I like. Just do something that helps you come back to yourself. And then lastly, ask yourself, am I responding to the present or to my habitual way of criticizing myself? This works because Virgo reacts to perceived inefficiencies by judgment, self-criticism, overthinking, and self-correcting. This cycle breaks that pattern by allowing you to feel your emotions from an authentic problem-solving place. And it also reduces rumination, which is this knee-jerk reaction that Virgo has to think and think and think and think. And it restores control over the body and mind by introducing a micro choice that brings you back to yourself. And it does that by giving you autonomy and choice in that moment, which is very empowering when you feel out of control. Moving on to my second emotional regulation tool. This one is targeting Taurus energy. For Taurus, sensory integration is a big deal because Taurus, as you know, is the toddler of the zodiac. That is the stage of sensory integration for us. So we're going to practice sensory emotion release. So step one, pick a sensory channel, whether that's touch, taste, sight, sound, whatever you feel the most connected to, okay? Now name the emotion. As an example of picking a sensory channel, it could be cooking. You're touching ingredients, you're cutting up tomatoes, you're alive in this moment, touching something that connects you with yourself, or knitting, or listening to music, okay? So as you're engaging in this activity, I want you to notice the emotions you're having. Notice any frustrations or longing that are coming up for you. I feel restless, wanting something enjoyable. That could be a thought that you have in that moment. Express that thought, that feeling, without judgment. Whether you want to verbalize it the way I just did, I feel restless, wanting something pleasurable. You can express it verbally or you can express it through art. Let the emotion come out. You could paint a painting, you could color it, you could hum it, you could mold it, you could play with clay and make something, you could write it out. There's different ways to express what you're feeling. Remember, sensory integration for Taurus is very literal. So taste, touch, sight, or sound. Choose one of those ways of allowing yourself to feel your feelings more deeply. One physical release that I find Taurus likes is engaging with their body, whether that is squeezing every muscle in their body from their face all the way to their toes, one at a time, and releasing one at like intentionally selecting one muscle at a time, one section of the body at a time, squeezing and releasing all the way to the toes, or maybe shaking hands vigorously, almost as if their hands are going to fall off of their body, just vigorously pushing the hands away from the body and shaking that for a couple of minutes, or tapping their shoulders, or stretching. Physical movement is very agreeable to Taurus energy, okay? So, because Taurus is the bull, so whenever the feelings are building up, they need to run, they need to move, they need to touch, they need to feel, they need to physically do something to diffuse it. Once you've done the physical movement, you can affirm to yourself what you desire. As an example, I can experience pleasure without shame, or they need to control. Okay? So to summarize, pick a channel through which you're going to allow yourself to feel. Name what you're feeling. Express what you're feeling without judgment. Physically release what you're feeling, and then give yourself permission to receive the emotion of that. That grounding affirmation at the end is that permission. What I really like about this tool is that Taurus tends to hold on, much like sister sign Scorpio. They tend to hold on to experiences, okay? They tend to cling to comfort, and they tend to postpone joy, even if the comfort is just familiarity but doesn't actually feel good. This tool regulates emotions by giving them sensory and physical channels through which they're actually feeling feelings, as opposed to holding on to routines that they describe as joyful. Preventing emotional suppression or passive tension is a way to release negative energy, and it keeps the negativity from building up. Lastly, moving on to an emotional regulation tool centered around Capricorn energy. This tool is called Belief, Fact, Emotional Matrix. Step 1. Identify a triggering belief. As an example, if I don't work every day, everything is going to fail. So that's a thought that many Capricorns have that I'm not even sure they're aware of it enough to express it, okay? So step 1 might be the hardest part for you, Capricorn. But once you've identified it, which is a belief system that triggers you, and you say it to yourself, I want you to observe the emotional response that you have from this belief system. Observe the fear, observe the anxiety. Pay attention to the irritation. Pay attention to how rigid your mindset is. This rigidity that you classically label as objectivity. I want you to take it all in. And then once you've stated the thought that triggers you, and you've taken in the emotions that you associate with that thought, we're going to fact check it, because Capricorn likes being practical. So ask yourself, is this true? Is this universally true? Or is this just a story that I've been comfortable with for many years? And then take one small action that slightly changes that belief system. As an example, delegate a task or try a new approach. Later that evening, I want you to journal 1 to 2 sentences on what actually happened when you were willing to challenge that thought. What happened emotionally? Was it what you expected? How did you feel before and after? And then wrap up your journaling by affirming yourself, giving yourself some self-compassion. As an example, I can reset my approach without losing safety or integrity. Capricorn often defaults at structure, control, and mental rigidity. This tool helps bring into focus some of the fear-driven thoughts and reactions that Capricorn habitually have that they may not be aware of. By separating these habitual stories from what's actually happening in real time in terms of the real-time emotional feedback that you're getting is allowing yourself a measured response instead of overcorrecting or just running on autopilot, which is really being driven by fear. These 3 earth sign coded tools focus on modulating emotional intensity, recognizing habitual reactions and patterns, and practicing conscious responses. The very essence of emotional regulation is being conscientious. I'm hoping that these structured, actionable, and repeatable tools are helpful for you under the eclipse window when tensions are going to be high between this pull of duty versus control and being true to what you really feel versus being of service. Now let's get into some integrative insights and action steps. The focus is on embodying growth, embodying emotional regulation and relational intelligence. This is not about empty promises. This is about actually putting work into integrating who we really are with what's actually happening in the present moment. This Virgo lunar eclipse is sharply illuminating areas where emotions have been automatic or reactive, especially around duty and relational projection. I would encourage you to look at what you have in your 7th and 12th houses because those areas are going to be particularly triggered. And also your rising sign because that speaks to your personal boundaries. Emotional maturity comes from recognizing the trigger before reacting to it. Notice when you feel irritated, when you feel anxious, when you feel like your needs are not being met and you're longing for something that feels like love. That longing is about the present moment. It's not about old patterns. The opposition to the Sun and Mercury is going to expose areas where we overthink instead of feeling our feelings. Emotional maturity means pausing long enough to recognize which responses are coming from being emotionally clear and which ones are coming from habitual fear of being criticized or feelings of overwhelm from criticizing ourselves too much. The square to the ascendant and descendant are exposing relational friction. Our relationships are asking us to develop the ability to notice our own contribution to the tension in our relationships and to respond without blame. That is a core step towards conscious decision making. The Virgo eclipse is going to expose these 3 key areas. Our shadows, which is our tendency towards control, perfectionism, avoidance of our flaws, people pleasing. Often the shadows manifest as self-criticism or projecting the things that we don't like about ourselves onto other people. It's also going to expose our desire, which is our longing for approval, longing for clarity, longing for emotional safety, longing for feeling loved, feeling useful, feeling understood. Desire here is amplified because the moon is opposing the sun, so it's forcing a conscious choice about what is genuine, what feels true versus what feels routine. Lastly, our vulnerability is going to be exposed. Vulnerability is about courage. It's about the courage to sit with discomfort without trying to fix it or without feeling like we need to explain it or rationalize it. The home life and the public life being in opposition to the North Node is encouraging us to face emotional truths about our family of origin, about our roots, about our culture, where we came from, our family patterns, our home or relational context. We're being asked to examine how some of those habits are now playing out in public because we've absorbed them as second nature because that's all we know and we never really question them. So we're being asked if we feel we're aligned with our destiny. Do we feel like who we are is who we really are? Or is it who we were trained to be? Integration here is asking us to acknowledge these elements without judgment. We're not criticizing, we're just testing responses with ourselves in small and safe ways rather than defaulting to just doing things without thinking. Because a lot of times when we find ourselves feeling reactive to feedback that we're given that, we feel triggered by is because our defense mechanisms are being activated. So, in favor of relational intelligence, whenever we find ourselves getting triggered in relationship, our first step should be to pause. Pause and track. Before reacting, name what you're feeling. What are you experiencing? Name the emotion. Name the trigger. Check if it's connected to your family of origin, to your past, or is it real in this moment? You may feel irritated with your partner, but that irritation could just be you being frustrated with not being acknowledged by them. Well, have you communicated to them that you need acknowledgement? And if you haven't, where did you get this message that other people could simply read your mind? Where did that come from? Who taught you that you could not communicate what your needs are and still get them met? So pause and track. Ask yourself these questions, okay? Another thing you can do is take small conscious action that honor your emotional truth. If you're feeling tired, delegate a task. If you're feeling tired, create a to-do list for the next day. Assert a boundary. Say no to being overly committed to servicing others. Virgo and Pisces are the service workers of the zodiac. Their identity is towards helping, towards fixing, towards improving others. They often forget that improvement starts with themselves. Okay? Boundaries are very important when you're a service worker. Emotional intelligence requires the body as data. So we're allowing the body to feel, and we're giving the body a chance to tell us what it feels, as opposed to avoiding the discomfort in the body and jumping to conclusions about what's happening and making this a cerebral exercise that goes on and on and on and on and on and on, and it's completely unproductive, and it leaves you feeling, emotionally overwhelmed, even more anxious than you were before you got started. Next, shadow dialogues. Journaling is a wonderful recommendation under a lunar transit in Virgo, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is all about communication. Journaling allows our internal voice and our hidden fears or desires to be heard. As an example, you could write, I am angry because I fear being overworked, not because I'm lazy. Okay? Oftentimes these two struggle with the balance between rest and work. So try to journal around some of those themes. And lastly, in relationship, communication needs clarity. And we want to seek that clarity without blaming. And we do that by practicing curiosity. Curiosity is how we get out of judgment. Curiosity is how we become smarter people, more intelligent people. Intelligent people are curious. They're not chasing the sure thing. They want to know what they don't know. So they ask questions. Ask yourself, am I seeking to be understood or to be right? When you're communicating from a place of being understood and you're communicating from a place of being right, different tone, different quality of expression. Even the way we talk about the thing is different. Same topic, but the intentions dilute the process, right? Because if I want to be right, I'm arrogant. I'm overly confident. I'm domineering. You're going to hear that in my tone because your feedback means nothing to me because I've already figured out you're wrong. So now I'm just trying to prove to you that you don't know what you're talking about. Compare that to me being curious because I want you to understand where I was coming from. Very different presentation, right? So we want to practice being more curious. That's how we get smarter in relationship. Lastly, let's talk about embodying lessons versus intellectualizing lessons. I want you to identify an emotional script that's been running in the background of your life your entire life. As an example, an emotional script that someone may have is that they're a burden. I am a burden. So when I have a problem, I don't reach out to people because I'm a burden. I want you to consciously acknowledge that and then choose to act differently. So as an example, you have a feeling, you have the thought that says, I'm a burden. I don't want to burden people with my problems. I have to deal with everything on my own because I'm a burden. So we're going to be brave, right? We're going to be courageous. In spite of this thought, we're going to do something different. We're going to ask for help. And we're going to notice the visceral emotional shift that we feel inside of our mind and our body and our heart space when we choose to ask for help. That visceral emotional shift is power. We want more of it. Another tool that's very good for Virgo energy is daily micro practices. As an example, practice 5 to 10 minutes of mindful reflection every day, plus one small behavioral experiment. As an example, pause Before correcting someone, just pause and ask yourself whether it's worth it. And what is your intention in doing that? Honor a personal preference without explanation, or even share a subtle vulnerability. These are all exercises to bring you back to yourself with Virgo energy, because when Virgo is in their machine body, correcting you at the first sign of the mistake is the goal, because I'm a machine. Ignoring my personal preference to prioritize what's needed in that moment, or what you need from me, is my goal, because I'm a machine. Hiding my vulnerability to show up as competent and strong, capable and tough comes naturally, because I'm a machine. You're being asked to give yourself permission to learn from your pain and become a human being. Where did you notice old patterns come up as I said that? How can you respond differently to situations in a way that humanize you? How can you bring more authenticity to your day-to-day as opposed to just being a habitual machine? By intentionally testing your own emotional awareness in real time, you get to convert this eclipse season from a symbolic event into something practical, a practical training ground for emotional resilience, clearer relational boundaries, and also adaptive decision making, because you're taking into account lessons from the past. The lesson here under this lunar eclipse is not to avoid stress, but see it clearly for what it is, and to also notice what's reactive and what's conscious, and then choose your emotional truth. I'm going to leave you with some journal prompts to help you explore your thoughts and feelings under this Virgo full moon. Number 1, what am I resisting because it disrupts my self-image as capable or a good person? Number 2, where am I projecting my frustration onto others instead of naming my own limitations? Number 3, what emotional patterns feel familiar but no longer feel honest for me? And lastly, number 4, what would change if I allowed imperfection without self-punishment? I'm just going to keep it real with you, okay? This Virgo lunar eclipse doesn't care what you know or what you understand. It cares what you're still doing out of habit. It exposes the quiet places where you've been managing instead of living, where being capable replaced being honest, where control was substituted for being safe, where self-criticism passed as self-awareness. There is grief in that recognition. Criticizing yourself 24/7 is not being self-aware. Being safe isn't the same thing as being controlling. And being competent and capable isn't the same thing as being honest. Let your grief be real. That grief is information. It's not weakness. What hurts now is not the eclipse. It's the moment you realize how long you've been carrying what was never actually required of you. You created these rules. You burdened yourself. It's time to do the opposite. How many emotional compromises have you made in the name of stability, usefulness, or keeping the peace? This is the cost of you abandoning yourself. You don't need a breakthrough. You need to refuse. You need a refusal to keep overriding your body, a refusal to keep explaining your discomfort away, a refusal to keep earning rest, earning love, earning legitimacy. You are legitimate. You are worthy. You deserve rest. You deserve love. If nothing changes after this, the pattern just continues. That's the truth that this eclipse is making unavoidable for you. So, choose one place to stop betraying yourself. Choose one behavior that no longer works for you. Choose one truth that you're going to speak without softening it. That single act of stepping into truth is enough to shift the matrix. This eclipse isn't promising comfort, it's offering integrity. Take it or keep perfecting a life that quietly is killing you. If you're exhausted, I hope you're brave enough to give yourself permission to face the truth. and let go of what no longer aligns with your current state of consciousness, even if it stings a little. You can do it. In the same way that you chose to torture yourself all these years, you can choose to be kind and loving towards yourself starting now. Looking forward to reconnecting with you for the new moon in Aries on March 19th, 2026. Happy lunar eclipse in Virgo. You can book your astrology reading at intuitivehealing.com. You can also watch videos at Intuitive Healing here on YouTube for Astrology 101 content. Listen to the Aquarius podcast on Spotify, as well as here on YouTube for your horoscope. If you're interested in astrology and love connections, you can visit at Styled Under Libra. And of course, for health and wellness and holistic healing, visit at Styled Under Virgo for all of your astrology content. Thanks so much for watching.